In the dusty courthouse of Fort Smith, Arkansas, a Deputy United States Marshal stood before a judge, not as a lawman this time, but as a father. He had spent 2 weeks tracking the most dangerous fugitive of his career across the unforgiving plains of Indian Territory. He had outwitted that fugitive's allies, anticipated every move, and brought him in without a single shot fired. Now he placed him under arrest and walked him into a cell. The fugitive's name was Benny Reeves. The lawman's name was his father, Bass Reeves. This was a man who had been born into slavery, who had once been considered property with no name of his own choosing, and who would go on to become one of the most feared, most respected, and most successful lawmen the American frontier ever produced. Over 32 years, he brought in more than 3,000 outlaws across 75,000 square miles of some of the most lawless territory on earth. He spoke 5 native languages. He could not read a single word, and by the time his story ends, you will understand why some historians believe this one man may have inspired America's most enduring legend of justice, the Lone Ranger himself. This is the true story of Bass Reeves. The story of Bass Reeves begins not with a badge, but with chains. He was born in July of 1838 in Crawford County, Arkansas, into a world that did not recognize him and a man with rights only as property belonging to a state legislator named William Steele Reeves. As was the custom of the time, the boy was given his enslaver's surname, a name that would later become legendary, but which began as a mark of ownership, not honor. When Bass was still young, the Reeves family relocated their household and their human property to Grayson County, Texas. There, on the edge of the frontier, young Bass grew from a water boy into a field hand, his days defined by labor under a sky that offered no promise of freedom. But even in bondage, something in him set him apart. He was tall for his age, courteous in manner, and possessed of a quiet, watchful intelligence. These qualities caught the attention of his enslaver's son, George Reeves, a man who would, in a cruel twist of fate, become both Bass's tormentor and, indirectly, the architect of his path toward freedom. No one in that Texas household could have imagined that the silent, observant boy serving their table would one day become one of the most formidable lawmen in American history. As the Civil War erupted across the nation, George Reeves organized a company within the Texas cavalry to fight for the Confederacy, and he took Bass with him, not as a soldier, but as a forced body servant, a slave dragged into a war being fought, in part, over his own freedom. The exact details of what happened next have been debated by historians for generations, but the most credible accounts, passed down through Reeves' family oral history, describe a violent confrontation within a card game between master and slave. Words were exchanged, tempers flared, and Bass Reeves, a man who had spent his entire life suppressing rage in the face of cruelty, finally struck back, beating George Reeves severely. In the world of 1860s Texas, this single act of self-defense was not merely a crime, it was effectively a death sentence. Bass Reeves had only one choice left: run. He fled north and east, away from the only life he had ever known, toward a vast, untamed expanse of land the United States government had set aside for Native American nations. It was called Indian Territory. He had no map, no money, and no certainty of survival. What he found there would forge him into a legend. Indian Territory, the land that is now Oklahoma, was, in the 1860s, one of the most lawless and unmapped regions in North America. For most fugitives, it was a death trap. For Bass Reeves, it became a sanctuary and a school. He found refuge among the Cherokee, the Creek, and the Seminole nations, peoples who had themselves been forcibly displaced from their ancestral homelands and who understood, perhaps better than anyone, what it meant to be hunted by a government that did not recognize your humanity. Living among these communities, Reeves did something extraordinary. He learned. He absorbed their languages, Cherokee, Creek, Seminole, and eventually Chickasaw and Choctaw as well, until he could speak and understand 5 distinct native tongues, an almost unheard of skill among white settlers, let alone a fugitive former slave. He learned how to track game and men alike across unmarked terrain. He learned how to read the land itself, the bend of grass, the disturbance of soil, the silence of birds that signaled an intruder nearby. He sharpened his skill with a rifle and pistol until his aim became the stuff of camp legend. Every skill he absorbed during these hidden years would later make him untouchable in pursuit of outlaws who thought this same wilderness made them safe. In January of 1863, while Bass Reeves lived among the tribes of Indian Territory, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and when the Civil War finally ended in 1865, the 13th Amendment made it permanent and absolute. Bass Reeves was no longer a fugitive. He was, for the first time in his 27 years on Earth, a free man under the law of the United States. It is one of history's great ironies that the very wilderness which had sheltered him as an outlaw from slavery would later become the territory he policed as an officer of that same United States government. But freedom did not erase the years of hiding, nor the skills he had built in the shadows. Reeves left the territory and made his way to Van Buren, Arkansas, where he purchased land and began the quiet, dignified life of a farmer and rancher, something that had been unimaginable to him as a child in bondage. In 1864, he married a Texas woman named Nellie Jenny. Together, they would eventually raise a large family. Accounts suggest as many as 10 to 12 children, on land that Bass Reeves owned outright, worked with his own hands, and could pass on as he chose. For a man born into chains, this ordinary farm life was nothing short of a quiet revolution. Farming brought Bass Reeves stability, but it could not contain the skills he had spent years honing in the wilderness. Federal deputy marshals, operating out of the Van Buren courthouse, soon learned of a local black farmer who knew Indian Territory more intimately than any white lawman alive, who spoke the languages of its peoples, understood its hidden trails, and could track a man across terrain that swallowed lesser trackers whole. Reeves began taking occasional work as a scout and guide, leading federal officers into the same lands where he himself had once hidden as a fugitive. He once said, with characteristic plainness, that he knew the territory like a cook knows her kitchen. This was not boastfulness, it was simple fact, earned through years of necessity. Each expedition deepened his reputation among the small, tight-knit community of federal lawmen who operated along the Arkansas Indian Territory border. They began to understand that this quiet farmer possessed something rare, not just physical courage, but an almost supernatural command of the land's secrets. Word of his abilities was spreading, and soon it would reach the desk of a newly appointed federal judge, whose name would become synonymous with frontier justice. In 1875, a man named Isaac Charles Parker was appointed federal judge for the Western District of Arkansas, a court whose jurisdiction stretched across a staggering 75,000 square miles of Indian Territory, the largest judicial district in the nation. Parker would become known to history as the hanging judge, a man tasked by the federal government with bringing order to a land that had, for decades, served as a refuge for murderers, horse thieves, and bandits fleeing justice elsewhere. Parker appointed U.S. Marshal James F. Fagan to recruit 200 deputy marshals capable of enforcing federal law across this lawless expanse. Fagan had heard the stories of a remarkable scout near Van Buren, a man who knew the territory intimately and spoke the languages of its peoples fluently. He sought out Bass Reeves and offered him a deputy's commission. At 37 years old, Reeves accepted. He became one of the first black deputy United States Marshals ever to serve west of the Mississippi River, a position of extraordinary federal authority granted to a man who, just over a decade earlier, had been considered legal property with no rights whatsoever. It was an appointment almost unthinkable by the standards of the era, and Bass Reeves was determined to prove himself worthy of it. There was something almost impossible about what Bass Reeves accomplished as a deputy marshal. He could neither read nor write, a direct and bitter consequence of the laws that had once forbidden enslaved people from literacy. Yet this did not slow him for a single day. Before setting out from Fort Smith with a satchel full of arrest warrants, Reeves would have a clerk read each warrant aloud to him. He would then memorize every detail, the crime, the description, the name, associating each one with what he later described as its particular shape. Deputies who rode with him watched in astonishment as Reeves, presented with a stack of warrants identical in appearance, could pull out the correct one without hesitation every single time. He stood 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighed roughly 180 pounds, an imposing physical presence sharpened by a thick handlebar mustache and a steady, watchful gaze. He was ambidextrous with a pistol, capable of drawing and firing accurately with either hand, and his marksmanship with a rifle became the stuff of frontier legend. He could reportedly bring down a running target at a quarter mile. Outlaws across the territory soon learned a hard truth. When Bass Reeves came for you, there was nowhere left to hide. The territory Bass Reeves patrolled was almost unimaginably vast, 75,000 square miles of plains, forest, and river crossings, an area larger than many entire nations, with no fences, few roads, and outlaws who knew every hiding place within it. When Reeves set out from Fort Smith on an expedition, he traveled with a small, hardened team, a chuck wagon stocked with supplies, a camp cook who often doubled as an armed guard, and at least one Native American passman who knew the local terrain. These expeditions were not brief affairs. A single circuit might stretch 800 miles round trip, carrying Reeves and his team to remote outposts like Fort Reno, Fort Sill, and Anadarko, sometimes lasting months at a time. Far from his wife and growing family back in Arkansas, the dangers were constant and real. There was a stretch of territory 80 miles west of Fort Smith that deputies grimly called the deadline, a point past which a lawman effectively gambled with his own life every time he crossed it. Reeves crossed that line more times than almost any deputy in the court's history, and somehow, time and again, he returned alive, often with more captured fugitives in tow than any other marshal in the district. Among the countless stories of Bass Reeves's cunning, one stands above the rest as proof of his patience and creativity. Pursuing to outlaw brothers believed to be hiding at their mother's remote cabin near the Red River, Reeves made a decision that revealed his true genius. Rather than approach with force, he would approach with deception. He set up camp with his posse roughly 28 miles from the cabin, concealed his badge, his handcuffs, and his pistols beneath a set of tattered, dirty clothing, and set out alone on foot. He arrived at the cabin disguised as a wandering tramp, wearing worn-out shoes and a battered floppy hat with 3 bullet holes punched through it, leaning on a cane and claiming to have just escaped a posse that had nearly killed him. The unsuspecting mother, moved by sympathy, invited him inside, fed him, and even suggested that her sons might benefit from joining forces with this clever stranger on the run. That evening, when the 2 outlaw brothers returned home and settled into sleep, Reeves quietly clamped handcuffs around their wrists. At dawn, he woke them and marched both men the full 28 miles back to his waiting posse, while their furious mother trailed behind the entire way, shouting curses at the lawman who had so completely outwitted her. By the early 1880s, Bass Reeves's reputation had grown beyond Indian Territory itself, reaching the pages of regional newspapers. In 1882, the Fort Smith elevator reported with evident astonishment that Deputy Marshal Bass Reeves had returned from a single expedition with 16 prisoners in custody, men wanted for crimes ranging from attempted murder to arson, at a time when other deputies considered themselves successful, bringing in 3 or 4. His arsenal of disguises grew legendary among lawmen and outlaws alike. He posed as a cowboy drifting through cattle country. He posed as a farmer, once famously steering his wagon deliberately over a stump to draw suspicious outlaws out of hiding to help him, only to arrest them the moment they appeared. He posed when the situation demanded it, as an outlaw himself, blending so convincingly into the criminal world that his targets never suspected the federal badge hidden beneath his coat. Reeves was, by every account, a courteous man, gentle with animals, respectful in speech, scrupulously honest in his dealings, and yet he was simultaneously the most feared man in the territory, a contradiction that only deepened the legend growing around him with every passing year.